That morning, I was already running late for a meeting and halfway out the door when I realized I'd left my gloves on the kitchen counter. February air bit at my hands as I scrambled back inside to grab them. Little did I know that insignificant detail, a pair of black leather gloves, would set off a chain of events that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. The cafe was never part of my plan that day. After the meeting, I thought about heading straight home. But my boss had canceled a late afternoon conference call, and with an unexpected pocket of free time, I figured I'd treat myself to a hot coffee. It was freezing outside, and the idea of warming my hands around a mug sounded like a small victory against the dreary day. I pushed open the door to the cafe, and the smell of roasted beans and freshly baked pastries hit me immediately. It was comforting, familiar, but that feeling lasted only a second because there, in the far corner of the room, sat my wife, Lynette. At first, I didn't register it as strange. Lynette loved this place. It was one of her favorite spots to grab a coffee and read a book. But then I noticed she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, leaning forward like he was hanging on her every word. They were laughing softly, sharing a moment that felt too personal, too intimate, for a simple meeting. I froze. My first instinct was to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a coworker, a cousin I'd never met, or an old friend from her college days. But the way she touched his hand, the light, deliberate graze of her fingers, said otherwise. It wasn't just friendly. It was calculated, affectionate. It was betrayal. My legs felt like they were weighed down by cement, but somehow I walked further into the cafe. She didn't notice me. I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, I moved toward the counter, ordered a coffee I didn't want, and sat at a table where I could observe without being seen. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. Lynette looked radiant, her laughter echoing softly in the cozy space. She wasn't distracted or distant like she'd been at home lately. She was fully present, engaged in this man's world in a way she hadn't been with me in months. The realization hit me like a brick. This wasn't just a casual coffee date. This was something more. As they got up to leave, I scrambled for a piece of paper. I grabbed the back of an old receipt from my wallet and scrawled 4 words in shaky handwriting. "Don't come back home." I folded the paper and placed it on the table where they had been sitting, knowing she would see it when she returned for her forgotten scarf. Then, without a word, I left. Walking out of that cafe was the hardest thing I've ever done. My breath fogged in the cold air as I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. How long had this been going on? Who was he? What did I miss? Every memory of our years together now felt tainted, twisted by the possibility that none of it had been real. But what happened next, when Lynette saw that note, was something I never could have anticipated. It wasn't an apology, a tearful confession, or even an attempt to explain herself. No, what she did next was far worse, and it would haunt me for the rest of my life. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself I needed to stay calm. But how could I? The image of Lynette laughing with that man, touching him so casually, kept replaying in my mind like a cruel, endless loop. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Max, our Labrador, wagged his tail as if sensing something was wrong. I knelt down, running my fingers through his fur, trying to ground myself. "What do I do, buddy?" I whispered. Max tilted his head, clueless but comforting. I sat on the couch, staring at the clock, each tick echoing in the silence. I imagined her finding the note. What would she do? Would she call me, panicked and apologetic? Would she rush home, tears streaming down her face, begging for forgiveness? Or would she simply ignore it and pretend nothing had happened? Hours passed, and then my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a text. "Lynette, you're overreacting. I'll come by tomorrow to talk." That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just cold dismissal. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Overreacting? Did she seriously think this was something minor, something we could sweep under the rug with a quick conversation? My blood boiled as I typed out a reply, but halfway through, I deleted it. What was the point? She clearly didn't care. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the house, replaying every moment of the past few months, trying to piece together the signs I'd missed. The late nights, the sudden secrecy with her phone, the way she always seemed a little too busy for me lately. It all made sense now. I felt like a fool. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the door open. Lynette walked in as if everything was fine, dressed impeccably as always, her coat slung casually over her arm. She didn't even look guilty. "Morning," she said, setting her keys on the counter. Her voice was calm, almost detached. "Morning," I repeated, my voice low. "That's all you have to say?" She sighed, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Roger, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not what you think. Not what I think." I snapped, slamming my coffee mug on the counter. "I saw you, Lynette. I saw you with him. Don't insult me by pretending I didn't." For the first time, she looked uneasy, her eyes darting to the side. "Okay, fine," she admitted. "We had coffee. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," I repeated, incredulous. You were practically draped over him, laughing like you didn't have a care in the world. "You don't touch a coworker like that, Lynette." Her expression hardened. "You're acting paranoid. He's just a friend, Roger. I don't know why you're making this into something it's not." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Just a friend? You expect me to believe that? After everything I saw?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might say something to defend herself. But instead, she shrugged. "Believe what you want. I'm not going to stand here and justify myself to you." That was when I realized she wasn't going to admit to anything. She wasn't going to apologize or even acknowledge what she'd done. To her, this was my problem, not hers. "You know what?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Don't bother coming back tonight. In fact, don't bother coming back at all. Take your things and go stay with your friend." Lynette's eyes narrowed. "You're being ridiculous," she said, grabbing her keys. "I'll come back when you've calmed down." And with that, she walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in stunned silence, the weight of her indifference crashing down on me. She didn't care. She truly didn't care. But later that evening, I would find out just how little she cared, and it would make everything that had happened so far look like a warm-up act for the real betrayal. What Lynette did next was beyond anything I could have imagined. After Lynette left, the house felt emptier than ever. I tried to convince myself that this was just another argument, that she'd come back in a day or two, apologetic and ready to talk things through. But deep down, I knew better. Something was broken, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fixed. That evening, as I sat on the couch staring blankly at the muted TV, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Lynette, but rather a message from an unknown number. Frowning, I opened it. It was a photo. At first, I didn't recognize what I was looking at. The image was grainy, clearly taken in poor lighting, but after a moment, the details became clear. It was Lynette, at some bar I didn't recognize, sitting on the same man's lap. She looked drunk, her head thrown back in laughter, her arms wrapped around his neck. My stomach churned. Who had sent this? Why? Before I could process, another text came through. "Unknown. Your wife doesn't seem to miss home much." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was deliberately trying to hurt me. But who? I wanted to reply, to demand answers, but before I could type anything, another message arrived. "Unknown. There's more. If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. 57th and Pine. Don't tell her." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Who was this person? Was this a cruel joke? Or was there something more going on than I'd even realized? Against my better judgment, I saved the number and decided to go. The next day, I arrived at the meeting spot, a small park bench near a busy intersection. I looked around, unsure who I was supposed to meet. After a few minutes, a woman in her late 20s approached. She had dark sunglasses, a sharp coat, and an air of discomfort, as though she didn't really want to be there. "Roger?" she asked, her voice low. "That's me," I replied cautiously. "Who are you?" She hesitated, glancing around before sitting down beside me. "My name's Erica. I used to date the man you saw with your wife." Her words hit like a hammer. "You know him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. "His name is Travis. And if he's with Lynette, well, let's just say she's not the first married woman he's gone after." My head spun. "What are you talking about?" Erica sighed, pulling out her phone. "Travis is a predator. He specifically targets women who are married or in relationships. He finds them vulnerable, sweeps them off their feet, and then when they're hooked, he leaves them. I found out the hard way. I was engaged when I met him, and he ruined everything. And now, I think your wife is his latest victim." She showed me more photos, Lynette and Travis at what looked like a hotel bar, then walking arm in arm down the street. The timestamps were from last night. My hands shook as I scrolled through the evidence. "I thought you deserved to know," Erica said quietly. "I've seen him destroy families, Roger. He doesn't care about anyone but himself." I couldn't speak. The betrayal was already unbearable. But now I realized that Lynette wasn't just cheating. She was falling into the hands of someone who thrived on destroying lives. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally managed to ask. "Because no one warned me," Erica said, standing up. "And I wish they had." She walked away, leaving me sitting there with my world crumbling around me. When I got home, I didn't know what to do. The photos burned in my mind, and Erica's words echoed in my ears. I wanted to confront Lynette, to demand answers, but she hadn't come back home. The silence in the house was suffocating. I poured myself a drink, then another, trying to numb the pain. That's when I heard Max barking outside. Someone was at the door. My heart leapt. Was it Lynette? Had she come back to talk? But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Travis. He stood there, a smug smile on his face, holding a single envelope. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing it to me. "What the hell are you doing here?" I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. Travis didn't flinch. "Just delivering a little message from Lynette. Don't shoot the messenger." I ripped open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Lynette. "You're being dramatic. I'm staying with Travis for a while to clear my head. Don't do anything stupid. We'll talk when I'm ready." My hands trembled as I crumpled the note. "You think this is a joke?" I yelled. Travis just smirked, stepping back off the porch. "Relax, buddy. She'll come back eventually. They always do for a while anyway." And with that, he walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with rage, humiliation, and despair swirling inside me. I knew then that Lynette wasn't coming back. Not in the way I wanted. And worse, she didn't care how much she was breaking me. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What Lynette and Travis didn't know was that I was done being the passive, heartbroken husband. They had no idea what was coming next. The moment Travis walked away, I slammed the door so hard the walls rattled. Max barked, startled by the noise, but I barely noticed. My mind was spinning, a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. How had my life spiraled into this? How could Lynette, the woman I'd built my world around, treat me like I was disposable? I sank onto the couch, gripping the crumpled note she had sent me. "We'll talk when I'm ready." Those words stung more than anything else. No apology, no remorse, just arrogance and indifference. It was as if I was nothing more than an obstacle in her new adventure with Travis. But the anger inside me began to shift into something else. Determination. This wasn't going to be the end of my story. I wasn't going to let her and her smug new lover walk all over me. They thought I was weak, a pushover. Fine. Let them think that for now. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. First, I needed to think rationally. I couldn't afford to let my emotions control me. Lynette and Travis had made a fool out of me, but that didn't mean I had to keep playing the fool. If they thought they could waltz into my life, destroy it, and get away unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. The first thing I did was check our shared finances. Lynette had access to our joint account, and if she was staying with Travis, I had no doubt she'd try to use my money to fund her little escapade. Sure enough, when I logged in, I saw multiple charges. Fancy restaurants, hotel bookings, even a spa day. The audacity of it made my blood boil. I immediately transferred the majority of the funds into a separate account under my name and froze the rest. Lynette wouldn't be spending another dime of my hard-earned money. If she wanted to live it up with Travis, she'd have to do it on her own. Next, I started looking into legal advice. Divorce wasn't a word I wanted to think about, but after everything that had happened, it was inevitable. Still, I wasn't going to rush into anything. I wanted to make sure I was prepared, that I had everything in place to protect myself. But most importantly, I needed to know the full extent of what I was dealing with. Erica's warning about Travis stuck in my mind. If he had a pattern of targeting married women, there had to be more to his story. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lynette wasn't just caught up in a fling. She was tangled in something far darker. The next day, I reached out to Erica. She'd left her number in case I had more questions, and though I felt uneasy about involving her further, I knew she might have answers I desperately needed. "Erica, it's Roger," I said when she picked up. "I need your help." She sighed on the other end of the line. "I thought you might call. What's going on?" I told her about the note, the charges on my account, and Travis showing up at my door. As I spoke, her silence was deafening, and when I finished, she let out a long, frustrated exhale. "That sounds exactly like him," she said. "He's done this before. Latched onto women with access to money, convinced them to leave their husbands, and drained them dry before moving on. He's a professional manipulator, Roger. And if Lynette's involved with him, it's only a matter of time before she gets burned." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had to stop this before it went any further, not just for my sake, but for Lynette's too. As much as I hated what she'd done, I didn't want her to fall victim to someone like Travis. "Do you know how I can find out more about him?" I asked. Erica hesitated. "There's a private investigator I used when everything went south with him and me. She's discreet and thorough. I can give you her contact information." I didn't hesitate. "Please, send it over." By the end of the day, I had hired the investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Marla. She assured me she'd start digging into Travis's background immediately. As I hung up the phone, I felt a small glimmer of hope for the first time in days. I spent the evening gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Text messages from Lynette, bank statements, the photos Erica had sent me. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I figured the more information I had, the better prepared I'd be for whatever came next. And then, as I was sifting through emails on my laptop, I found something that made my heart stop. It was an email from Lynette, dated 2 weeks ago, sent to Travis. The subject line read, "I can't wait for us to be free." I clicked on it, my hands trembling. The message was short but damning. "Roger's too blind to see what's happening. I'll tell him everything soon, and we can finally start our life together. I've already moved most of the money, we're almost there." My head spun. Moved most of the money? Where? How? I checked our accounts again and found nothing out of the ordinary. But then it hit me. Lynette had access to a savings account I'd set up years ago, one I rarely touched. Sure enough, when I logged in, over $30,000 was missing. I sat there, staring at the screen, a mix of rage and devastation washing over me. Lynette wasn't just cheating. She was actively plotting to steal from me, to fund her new life with Travis. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war, and I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, Marla, the private investigator, called me. Her voice was calm but direct, like she'd been through this kind of thing 100 times before. "I've got something for you," she said. "It's not good." I braced myself as she started explaining. Travis wasn't just some smooth talker going after married women for fun. He had a history. He'd been involved with at least 4 other women over the past 5 years, all of whom were married or in long-term relationships. His pattern was disturbingly consistent. He gets close, convinces them to leave their husbands, and drains their savings, Marla said. Then, once the money runs dry, he disappears. A couple of these women even reported him to the police, but he's careful. There's never enough evidence to stick. I clenched my fist. "So, he's a professional scam artist?" "Essentially, yes," she replied. "And it looks like your wife is his next target. He's got her right where he wants her." Marla went on to explain that Travis had a history of using fake identities. His real name wasn't even Travis. His actual name was Russell Hayes, and he had a few minor fraud charges on his record. Nothing major, but enough to show a pattern. "Does Lynette know who he really is?" I asked. Marla paused. "Unlikely. Most of the women don't until it's too late. He's good at what he does, Roger. He's playing her like a fiddle." Hearing this didn't make me feel better. If anything, it deepened the wound. Lynette wasn't just betraying me. She was being used by a man who saw her as nothing more than a bank account. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice heavy. "Gather everything," Marla said. "Bank statements, text messages, anything that shows what's happening. And if you're thinking of divorcing her, which honestly you should get a good lawyer, you need to protect yourself financially. She's already taken a chunk of your savings, and if she's still connected to your accounts, she could take more." Her advice was cold but necessary. I thanked her and hung up, feeling more determined than ever. If Lynette wanted to betray me, and if Travis or Russell or whoever he was wanted to ruin my life, they had another thing coming. That evening, I sat down with all the evidence I had. The emails, the bank records, the photos Erica had sent me, everything Marla had dug up. It painted a clear picture of deception and manipulation. I knew I couldn't confront Lynette directly yet. She'd deny everything or twist the story to make me look like the bad guy. No, I needed to be smart. As I reviewed the documents, I noticed something curious in the bank records. Payment had been made to a hotel I didn't recognize, dated just 3 days ago. It wasn't the same place where Erica had photographed them. It was somewhere new. I called the hotel, pretending to be Lynette's husband, which technically I still was. After a little convincing, the receptionist confirmed that Lynette and Travis had checked in under her name. They were still there. My heart raced. They were probably in some cozy room right now, laughing at my expense, spending my money. The thought made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to act on impulse. If I barged in there, it would only give them more power over me. No, I needed to be calculated. I needed to make my next move count. The next morning, I met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca. I laid everything out for her, the photos, the emails, the missing money. She listened carefully, taking notes as I explained the situation. "You've got a strong case for financial fraud," Rebecca said. "The courts don't take kindly to spouses who siphon money from joint accounts without consent. But the key is documentation. The more you have, the better your position will be." Her words gave me a sense of control, something I hadn't felt in days. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking steps to protect myself. But even as Rebecca talked strategy, a darker thought lingered in the back of my mind. Lynette and Travis were still out there, probably planning their next move. And if I didn't act soon, they'd find another way to hurt me. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. By the following evening, I was ready to take action. With Rebecca's advice fresh in my mind and the evidence stacked against Lynette and Travis, I knew it was time to confront them, but not recklessly. I wasn't going to barge into the hotel like some jealous fool. Instead, I was going to hit them where it hurt the most. Their lies. I returned to the café where I had first seen them together. It felt like a twisted full circle. Sitting at the same table, I stared at the spot where their betrayal had been on full display. But this time, I wasn't paralyzed by shock. I was focused. I sent Lynette a text. I know everything. Meet me at the cafe tonight, alone. If you don't, I'll make sure Travis gets what's coming to him. It wasn't long before she replied. You're being dramatic, Roger. I'll come, but this better not be one of your lectures. Her arrogance was nauseating, but I kept my cool. An hour later, she walked through the door. Lynette looked polished as always, wearing the kind of outfit that made people turn their heads. But her expression was sharp, almost annoyed, like she was doing me a favor by showing up. I waved her over, and she slid into the seat across from me. What is this about, Roger? She asked, crossing her arms. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I placed the envelope of evidence on the table and slid it toward her. What's this? She asked, frowning. Open it, I said. She hesitated but eventually pulled out the photos, bank statements, and emails. Her face shifted from mild irritation to something closer to panic. Where did you get this? She demanded, her voice low but laced with anger. Does it matter? I shot back. What matters is that I know everything. Travis, or should I say Russell, is a con artist and you're just his latest mark. He's not in love with you, Lynette. He's using you. Her jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But instead, she laughed. A cold, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. You don't get it, do you? She said. You've been so wrapped up in your little suburban fantasy that you didn't even notice how miserable I was. Travis isn't perfect, but at least he listens to me. At least he makes me feel alive. Her words hit like a sledgehammer. Alive, I repeated. By stealing from me? By throwing away everything we built together? That's what makes you feel alive. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You were never enough, Roger. You tried, sure, but you never really understood me. And now you're playing detective, thinking you can fix everything with your spreadsheets and your lawyers. But you can't fix this. I don't want to be fixed. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt myself breaking. Not from sadness, but from anger, pure, unfiltered rage. I stood up, towering over her. You're right, Lynette. I can't fix this. But I can make damn sure you don't walk away from it unscathed. Before she could respond, I grabbed the envelope and walked out, leaving her sitting there, stunned. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in my car, parked a block away from the hotel where I knew she was staying with Travis. The anger inside me simmered, but beneath it was a deeper emotion. Clarity. Lynette had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The next step wouldn't be about revenge, it would be about taking back control. She thought she had the upper hand, but that was about to change. Because now I was done playing the victim. The next morning, I woke up in my car, stiff and exhausted but resolute. The sun was barely up, and the streets were quiet. My mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. Lynette had made her position painfully clear, and I was no longer the same man who would sit idly by, hoping she'd change her mind. I drove straight to the bank. It was still early, but I knew I couldn't wait. Rebecca had already prepared the paperwork for me to separate our finances completely, freezing all joint accounts to prevent Lynette from accessing another cent. I felt a strange satisfaction signing my name on those forms, severing yet another tie between us. Is there anything else you'd like us to do? The banker asked. Yes, I replied, pausing for a moment. If she tries to access these accounts, notify me immediately. From there, I drove to Rebecca's office to finalize the next phase. The divorce papers were ready. Rebecca assured me that with the evidence I'd gathered, including Lynette's text messages, the bank transfers, and Marla's findings, I had a strong case to protect what was left of my assets. She won't have a legal leg to stand on, Rebecca said confidently. The courts don't look kindly on spouses who commit financial fraud. Her words were reassuring, but they didn't take away the sting of knowing my marriage had come to this. As I signed the papers, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life turning out, But at least now, I was taking control of my future. By the time I got home, I was ready for the next step, delivering the papers to Lynette. I could have mailed them, but I wanted to hand them to her myself. She deserved to see the consequences of her actions in person. I texted her, "We need to talk. Meet me at the house tonight." Her reply came quickly, "Fine. But this better not be another lecture." I could practically hear her condescending tone through the screen, but I didn't care. This wasn't about winning her back. It was about closing the door on her and Travis for good. That evening, she arrived at the house, her usual confident self. She walked in like she owned the place, not even bothering to greet me. "What now, Roger?" she asked, setting her purse on the counter. "Another interrogation? Or did you hire someone else to follow me around?" I ignored her sarcasm and handed her the envelope with the divorce papers inside. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she opened it. "It's over, Lynette," I said firmly. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I've frozen the accounts, filed for divorce, and protected everything I can. You and Travis can do whatever you want, but you're not going to do it on my dime." Her face twisted with anger as she read through the papers. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, her voice rising. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I replied, standing my ground. "And you're lucky I'm not pressing charges for what you've already stolen." For a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. "You don't understand, Roger," she said, her tone shifting. "I didn't want it to come to this. Travis, he's not who you think he is. Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't try to play the victim now. You knew exactly what you were doing." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Instead, she scoffed, threw the papers back onto the counter, and grabbed her purse. "Fine," she said coldly. "If this is how you want it, then so be it. But don't think for a second that I'm the only one to blame here." And just like that, she walked out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the closed door. I should have felt relieved, even victorious, but instead, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built my life with, and now, she was nothing more than a stranger. But I couldn't dwell on that. Not now. Lynette and Travis thought they'd won, but they didn't realize the storm that was heading their way. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, because while Lynette walked out thinking she could move on unscathed, I had one last move to make, and this time it would be her world that came crashing down. The night Lynette walked out of the house for the last time, I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the divorce papers she had tossed on the counter. I had expected her to put up a fight, to scream, to try and manipulate her way out of it. But she didn't. She had just left like none of it mattered. And maybe, to her, it didn't. But she had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I put my final plan into motion. If Lynette thought she could walk away from this mess untouched, she was wrong. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for justice. And thanks to everything Marla had uncovered, I had exactly what I needed. First, I sent copies of the evidence to my lawyer, Rebecca, so she could ensure the divorce proceedings went in my favor. But I wasn't stopping there. I knew Lynette was still staying at the hotel with Travis, and I knew Travis had a history of disappearing once the money ran out. So I decided to push things along. I sent an anonymous tip to the hotel's management, attaching proof of Lynette and Travis's fraudulent credit card transactions. Since Travis always used fake names, I knew they wouldn't be able to verify his identity properly. Within hours, I got the confirmation I was waiting for. The hotel had kicked them out, and they had nowhere to go. Perfect. That evening, as I was pouring myself a drink, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Roger. It's me." Lynette's voice came through, laced with panic. I took a slow sip of my drink. "Lynette, listen, I need your help." I almost laughed. "Help? You've got some nerve." She hesitated. Travis, he's gone. He took everything. The money, my jewelry, he even took my car. I don't know what to do. I leaned back, letting the weight of her words settle in. So, let me get this straight. You left me, stole from me, ran off with some con artist, and now that he's screwed you over, you expect me to fix it. I didn't know this would happen, she stammered. I let out a humorless chuckle. No, Lynette, you chose this. You chose him. She sniffled. I messed up. I see that now. I have nowhere else to go. For a brief second, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered everything she had done. How she had laughed in my face, spent my money, and thrown our marriage away like it was nothing. Not my problem, I said coolly. You wanted a new life. Well, here it is. Roger, please. I hung up, and just like that, it was over. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The weight of Lynette's betrayal had finally lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. As for me, I was finally moving on.